My name is Sydney. I am 11 years old, and the moment my mom stood in our doorway with her suitcase in one hand and a crumpled $20 bill in the other, telling me with a fake bright smile that I was independent, now that I was not a baby anymore and she would be gone. For an entire month in Europe, I felt something inside me break, but I did not cry, not then, because I was too shocked, too confused, too busy trying to understand how the person who was supposed to love me more than anything could look at me like I was just another item checked off her vacation to-do list. She kissed my forehead quickly, without really looking at me, and said, "You will be fine, sweetie. Just order food if you need anything." And before I could ask her what she meant or tell her I was scared or beg her not to go, the door closed behind her, and I heard the taxi pulling away down our driveway. And I stood alone in the hallway, holding that $20 bill in my shaking hand, whispering to the empty house, "I will be fine," as if saying it out loud could somehow make it true. But deep down, in a place I did not want to admit existed, I knew I was not going to be fine at all. The first real problem hit me about 15 minutes later, when I found the emergency credit card she had left on the kitchen counter like it was some kind of safety net, some proof she had thought this through, except when I tried using it to order pizza from my phone, the transaction got declined. And I tried again with a different restaurant, and it got declined again and again and again, until I finally called the credit card company, and a bored woman on the other end told me the card had never been activated, and without the primary account holder, I could not activate it myself. So there I was, 11 years old, completely alone in an empty house with a useless piece of plastic and $20 to survive 30 entire days. And I opened the fridge, hoping maybe my mom had stocked it before she left, but all I found was half a carton of milk that smelled weird, some leftover Chinese food from 3 days ago that already had mold growing on it, and a bag of baby carrots. And I opened the pantry and saw 2 cans without labels that I did not know how to open, a box of stale cereal, and a jar of pickles I hated. And that was it. That was everything. Day 1, I tried to stay positive, cutting the bread into the thinnest slices I could manage, spreading peanut butter so thin you could barely see it, telling myself, this is what survivors do. They make things last. They stay calm. They do not panic. And I even laughed a little, thinking maybe I would tell this story at school someday, and everyone would think I was so brave, so independent. But by day 3, the laughter died completely when I realized just how hungry I actually was, and how the pantry looked even emptier than before. My stomach started growling constantly, loud enough that it embarrassed me, even though there was nobody around to hear it. And I tried distracting myself by turning on the TV and letting random shows play, just to fill the crushing silence that made the house feel like a tomb, or opening my mom's laptop and scrolling through her emails, watching her work messages pile up like they mattered more than I did, like her job was more important than making sure her daughter did not starve. And that is when something shifted inside me, something cold and sharp and clear. I grabbed my notebook, the one I used for school, and I opened it to a fresh page. And at the very top, in big bold letters, I wrote the word evidence. And under that word, I started writing everything down. Left alone at age 11 on June 15th. $20, no food plan, no working credit card, no babysitter, no neighbor checking in, no phone calls. And I did not know yet what I was going to do with this information, but somehow writing it down made me feel less powerless, because if I was old enough to be abandoned, then I was definitely old enough to remember every single detail. I picked up my phone and opened the camera app, and I turned it to face me, and I said quietly, "Day 3, I am still alone. The car does not work. I ate the last real food yesterday. If you are watching this, it means someone finally asked what happened to me." And I saved that video and locked my phone and sat there in the silent kitchen with my heart pounding, because part of me hoped nobody would ever see it, but another part of me desperately wanted that video to explode in my mom's face the second she walked back through that door. By day 5, everything got so much worse, because the hunger was not just in my stomach anymore. It was in my head, like a fog that made it hard to think straight. And I started getting dizzy whenever I stood up too fast, and I had to sit back down and wait for the room to stop spinning. And I found a forgotten box of cereal shoved in the back of the cupboard and I ate it dry straight from the bag, forcing myself to chew slowly to make it last because I did not know when I would find food again. I went back to my notebook and added another entry. Day 5, still no call. From Mom, not even a text message. And then I wrote something that scared me even as my hand moved. Across the page, if something happens to me, if I get sick or hurt or worse, this notebook will prove it was not my fault, and that was the moment everything changed inside me. Because this stopped being about just surviving until she got back and became about making sure that when people finally found out what she had done, there would be consequences, real permanent consequences she could not lie her way out of. On day 7, I felt so weak I could barely walk from my bedroom to the kitchen without having to stop and rest, and I shuffled over to the front window and looked outside at the normal world where kids were riding bikes and neighbors were mowing lawns and families were getting into cars together, going to movies or restaurants or parks, and I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and whispered, "You chose a vacation over me, you chose Europe over your own daughter, and when someone finds out what you did, you are going to wish you had never left." And then, like the universe had been listening, the doorbell rang and I froze completely, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest, because nobody ever rang our doorbell, and for a second I thought maybe it was my mom, maybe she had come back early, maybe she realized she had made a terrible mistake. But then the doorbell rang again, followed by 3 firm knocks, and I walked slowly to the door, my legs shaking, and opened it just a crack. Standing on my front porch was a man in a green jacket with my school's logo on it, and it took me a second to recognize him, but then I realized it was Mr. Hughes, the guidance counselor, and he said gently, "Hi, Sydney, I have been trying to reach your parents for days, but nobody is answering. Can I come in for a minute?" And every instinct told me to lie, to say everything was fine to protect my mom, but instead I stepped back and whispered, "Okay." He walked inside and his eyes immediately started scanning the room, and I watched him take in the pile of dishes in the sink, the empty counters, the trash that needed to be taken out, the fridge with almost nothing inside, and all of it suddenly became evidence I had not meant to leave out but could not hide. And he asked, "Where are your parents?" And I said, "They are in Europe," and his eyebrows shot up and he said, "For how long?" And I answered, "A month." "Who is staying with you?" he asked, and my throat felt tight as I whispered, "Nobody, just me." They said I was mature enough, and something in his face changed instantly, all the polite concern turning into something much more serious. And he sat down at the kitchen table and motioned for me to sit across from him, and he said, "Sydney, how long have you been alone?" And I said, "Almost a week." And he asked, "Do you have food? Do you have money?" And I laughed. This bitter sound I did not recognize, and said, "They left me $20 and a credit card that does not work." He stared at me for a long time, not the way adults usually stare when they are annoyed, but something heavier, like he was counting all the ways this was wrong. And he said, "This is not okay. You know that, right?" And I wanted to defend my mom, to make excuses, but instead I just pointed at my notebook sitting on the table with the word evidence on the cover, and I said, "I have been writing everything down just in case." He picked up the notebook and read the first page, and his jaw clenched, and he said, "Leaving an 11-year-old alone for a week, for a month, with no food and no supervision is not just bad parenting, Sydney. It is neglect, it is illegal, and there are people whose job it is to make sure this never happens." And I felt my heart start racing as I asked, "What happens now?" And he said, "Now I make some phone calls and we make sure you are safe." Within an hour, my neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, was at the door with bags of groceries, and she started crying the second she saw me, asking why I had not come to her, why I had not asked for help. And I told her because I thought asking for help meant I was weak, meant I was proving my mom right, that I could not handle being independent. And she hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and said, "Baby, asking for help is the strongest thing you can do." That night I slept at Mrs. Johnson's house in a guest room with clean sheets and a nightlight, and for the first time in 7 days I was not afraid. And the next morning a social worker came with a folder full of papers and a voice recorder, and she said, "Sydney, I need you to tell me everything, and nothing you say will get you in trouble. This is about keeping you safe." And so I told her everything. and she wrote it all down and took pictures of my notebook and my videos, and then she asked to see my house. I walked her through every room, showing her the empty fridge, the bare pantry, the pile of unpaid bills on the counter, the credit card that never worked, and she photographed everything her face, getting more serious with each picture, and she said, "We have more than enough evidence. Your mother will have to answer for this." And I felt this strange mix of guilt and relief, because part of me still wanted to protect my mom, but another part of me knew she deserved whatever was coming. 3 weeks later, my mom came home early, her vacation cut short by urgent calls from social services, and I watched from Mrs. Johnson's window as she pulled into our driveway and got out of the taxi with her suitcase, and I saw her face, smiling like she expected everything to be normal, and then I saw her freeze, because standing on our front porch waiting for her were 2 people, a police officer and a social worker. I could not hear what they were saying, but I saw my mom's face change from confusion to shock to horror as they handed her papers and explained why they were there, and I heard her voice rising high and panicked. No, this cannot be happening. She's fine. I left her money. I left her a card. This is a misunderstanding." And the social worker said, "Calmly, ma'am, we have documentation. We have evidence your daughter was found alone, malnourished and living in unsafe conditions." My mom turned and looked directly at Mrs. Johnson's window, and for a second our eyes met across the distance, and I saw something break in her face, something crack wide open, and she whispered something I could not hear, but I imagined it was please or sorry or how could you do this to me? And I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no guilt, just this quiet certainty that I had done the right thing. Weeks later, we sat in a courtroom, and a judge asked me questions about what happened and if I felt safe going home, and I looked at my mom sitting there crying, and I said quietly, "I want to be somewhere I matter, somewhere I am not forgotten, somewhere people check if I am okay," and the judge nodded and ruled that I would stay with Mrs. Johnson while my mom completed parenting classes and therapy and proved she understood what she had done wrong. As I walked out of that courtroom, holding Mrs. Johnson's hand, my mom called my name, and I turned, and she said through tears, "I am so sorry, Sydney. I did not know." And I looked at her and said, "That is the problem. You did not think about me at all." And those words hung in the air between us, heavier than any punishment the court could give, because revenge is not always loud or violent. Sometimes it is just finally telling the truth and letting the people who hurt you face the consequences they spent so long avoiding. And what waited for my mom when she came home was not her independent daughter. It was the evidence that broke every excuse she had ever made and forced her to see exactly what she had done. So tell me, if you were 11 and left alone, would you stay silent to protect them, or would you do what I did and let the truth speak louder than any lie they ever told?